Joining us now on the Picks for Polls podcast, we are continuing our NFC North training camp preview series. So we've done the Packers and Lions already. Let's round it out by talking about the Purple People Eaters, aka the Minnesota Vikings. Today I am joined by Luke Braun, who is the host of LockedOn Vikings. You can follow him on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. How's it going, Luke? Thanks so much for hopping on the show.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Let's get right into it because this is a team that was one of the NFL's pleasant surprises last year in terms of finishing 13-4. They really ran over the rest of the NFC North in the sense that no one expected them to come out and pretty much shut out Aaron Rodgers and the Packers in week one, but it just kind of happened. It was year one of the Kevin O'Connell era. So recap last season for us. I mean, what went well? What's something that the Vikings still have to improve on? Were you surprised that they finished 13-4, by the way?
I mean, I certainly didn't predict it. I don't think many people did because, as you know, they were coming off this 500 energy, coming off the Zimmer era. The culture was totally broken. Kevin O'Connell came in and fixed that first and foremost. And I think that's ultimately the utility of the season, is that they really created a positive locker room culture. Players love being there. They loved playing with each other. Guys like Dalvin Cook and Eric Kendricks that ended up leaving over the offseason, genuinely heartbroken to not be in Minnesota anymore. But of course, you know, it's a business. It's how it goes. Going 13-4, I think most people understand that the Vikings were not the same 13-4 that like the Bills were or the 49ers were, you know, the truer contenders of the NFL, and understood that, you know, I think we understand that they were a little streakier than that they weren't quite as consistent. And that's really, streakiness is really the story of that season. They were, you know, they would have the greatest quarter you've ever seen, and then they'd fall apart and blow that lead, or they would fall apart and get behind 3 scores, and they come back from 3-score leads multiple times. Just incredible stuff. But they also fell behind 3 scores a lot. And I think the big 2 reasons for that are the run game really struggled. So when they did have a lead, it was that much harder to protect. You kind of still just had to press and pass, and eventually you're going to get behind the chains. It's really hard to sustain that kind of game with a lead and just sort of stalemate, and to use a basketball analogy, like trade baskets to the end. It's really hard to do that when you don't have a run game. And then the defense was just an absolute disaster. They were one of the worst defenses in the league, bar none. I could go on and on about why that happened, but they fired Ed Donatel. They got rid of a position coach. They switched out the staff to Brian Flores, which brings in as different a philosophy as you can imagine, from the sort of soft zone coverage of Ed Donatel. Now we're just going to like be aggressive, blitz all the time, and make your guys react to that and get the ball out quick. And so that's kind of the hope of making the season work a little bit better, and then just hope that they can build on what they did. And you know, if you don't believe that they were a 13-14, yeah, that's totally fair. Hopefully they can add a couple of wins on to whatever you did believe they were and find themselves back in the playoffs.
See, I was writing about for our website. I mean, I was doing weekly NFC North recaps last year, and the Vikings got to a point where every Sunday night when I was sitting there writing the column for Monday morning, I'm like, okay, you know what? This is a team that you want to say Super Bowl contender, but you know deep down in your heart that they are not necessarily that, but they were one of the pleasant surprises. But you mentioned some key names like Adam Thielen, Eric Kendricks, Dalvin Cook, even they're no longer there. I mean, who's next up to go ahead and replace those guys? Because this is a team that, quite frankly, it was this offseason where they really moved on from some key players and kind of said, hey, goodbye to the Mike Zimmer era once and for all.
Right. And that's what you get when you get a new GM. I mean, you saw Ryan Poles do that in Chicago. He just did it kind of all right away. And the Vikings were trying to be a little smoother about that and trying to keep themselves competitive in the meantime. So let's not just get rid of guys and replace them with, 6 rounders. But that's kind of where we're at now, is they have some of the replacements they feel good about lined up. They feel good about Alexander Mattison. He was slated to be a free agent. They brought him back to be the replacement for Dalvin Cook. They knew that they were probably not keeping Cook kind of the whole offseason. It just took a while to manifest. So they knew that they were bringing back Madison to be RB1. They like him as a 3-down guy. I think he's fine. I think they're a little bit higher on him than is warranted, but it's also, I mean, it's the running back room. They can do it by committee. There's a lot of young guys that could step up if Alexander Madison isn't good enough. They got a bunch of young guys that are interesting. As for Thielen, they selected Jordan Addison in the first round. They also, I wouldn't sleep on what KJ Osborne can contribute. It won't be, offense defining or anything like that, but he has his role and he's good at his role. But Jordan Addison is kind of meant to be the guy. One of the big problems offensively the Vikings had when they were passing the ball was that you could kind of put a safety over the top of Justin Jefferson, and that'll shut down any receiver. I mean, that's how teams handled Randy Moss and Jerry Rice. And if you did that, the thing is, you got to have something else, because that'll take away a wide receiver no matter how good that guy is. So you have to have something else. And the Vikings, something else was like their tight end. TJ Hawkinson's great, but he's a tight end. And so having a tight end as your wide receiver 2 was a problem. Jordan Addison is here to fix that. So that's where, and Adam Thielen had some struggles with physicality and getting through more physical, bigger corners. And so that, like, hopefully, I mean, they drafted Addison, who's really small, so we might still have that problem, but at least we have that problem, but not slowing down in his 30s. And cheaper, of course, at least in terms of cap. And then for Eric Kendricks, they're probably most excited about this guy, Brian Asamoah. He was a 3rd rounder last year. You might not know about him at all. He played a little bit of spot duty last year, but they cannot stop raving about this guy. He's one of these fast sideline to sideline kind of linebackers. And he's smaller. So if you're a guard, you get your big paws on him, you got him. But he's very evasive. He'll cut under you and he'll cut around you and he'll be faster than you and he'll ruin your angles. And they're really, really excited about what they get with Brian Asamoah and how he has learned the speed of NFL defense and how much he's kind of getting a little more used to it, even though he's got to learn a new scheme from the one he learned last year because they fired everybody. They're very, very stoked on him as the Eric Kendricks replacement. And I don't think that they cut Eric Kendricks if they don't have like a lot of confidence.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Asamoah as a budding name to watch at middle linebacker, and really, I think just this entire division in general, one of the things that all 4 teams have kind of done over the last basically 2 to 3 seasons is add those young linebackers. You have the Packers who have Quay Walker, the Lions added Jack Campbell, and then the Bears have Tremaine Edmonds as well. But
yeah.
You hit on, I think, a really interesting point here, because Brian Flores is a guy who, again, got kind of shortlisted in Miami. He was out of there even though the team was improving, spends a year with the Steelers. I know you alluded to it already. I mean, I had a front row seat to watching Ed Donatel, and because he was here in Chicago under Vic Fangio for 5 to 6 seasons. But what is Brian Flores gonna bring to this team? Because that, to me, when I saw the news break, I was like, okay, that is the biggest move of the offseason for the Vikings, because all these young 1st, 2nd, 3rd year offensive minded head coaches love to have that veteran defensive coordinator and defensive mind in the room as insurance policy.
Exactly. And for Flores, I think the biggest thing is mentality. I know that's like a wishy-washy thing that's kind of hard to quantify, but if you look at the way they played under Donatel, they were soft in a lot of respects. They were soft up front. They just got pushed around a little bit too much, especially if they didn't have Harrison Phillips or Dalvin Tomlinson. They lost Dalvin Tomlinson, by the way. I think that's one they've done a poor job of replacing. There was a softness problem, but there was also schematic softness. That defense, that Fangio-style defense that worked so well in Chicago, it only really works if you have guys that can aggressively come downhill and be physical with it. But the Vikings played a little scared. Their safety would backpedal too far sometimes. He wouldn't really plant himself in the way that he needed to make plays. He wouldn't be reading. He'd just be kind of giving himself more and more and more space, and suddenly a 30-yard catch gets caught in front of him. And the corners had the same issue. A lot of those corners have been replaced as well with guys that we have separate questions about. It's difficult world at that cornerback position. But I think what Flores brings is this sort of idea of aggression. We were doing zone match. That means I've got an area, and as soon as a guy comes into my area, I'm going to be tight to him, right? And that means a lot of reading. That means if you're Eric Kendricks last year, you look at the quarterback, you watch his feet, see if he's doing quick game. If he's doing quick game, you got to react to that. If he's not doing quick game, go look at the route concept. And then you got to react to that. But When you react to the route concept, you got to get your eyes back on the quarterback to make sure you're actually reacting and flowing with the quarterback's eyes, which can mislead you. So you got to go back to the route concept to see. By the time he's done reading all that crap, the ball's been thrown. That was the mistake I think Ed Donatel had, was just having too many questions you had to answer before you could react, and guys weren't playing, they were thinking. With Flores, this is your gap, go. You're just launching guys. You just tie dudes to a rocket and point them in a direction. And guys are playing man coverage rather than super reedy, cerebral zone coverage. No, you have number 10, cover him. And that's it. I think that simplicity might be good for some of the younger players. But the problem is you got to be able to cover number 10. So if you can't, you're going to get beat that way. So I think what they're going to be now is a blitz team. They're going to be like the Giants were last year defensively, like the Ravens were when Wink Martindale was there. And not as safe of blitzes, with Fangio when he was with the Bears, the blitzes were a little safe. They were better protected, and that's part of what got him success. With Flores, it's protected with off-man coverage. So guys have to cover. If your blitz doesn't get home, you now could have like a superstar receiver on a Caleb Evans, and that's not going to go well for the Vikings. So there are going to be games where they just figure out the blitzes and the Vikings get dusted. There are going to also be games where the quarterback cannot figure out these gosh darn blitzes and takes 10 sacks and the Vikings do the dusting. I think it's going to be a very volatile season defensively with Brian Flores. And then if you do have one of these defensive catastrophe games, the question becomes, can the Vikings offense keep up? And, that's going to be something we handle week by week.
Yeah, I will say, in this Fangio style defense, what tends to make all the difference in the world is just having two guys up there, which is usually your nose, your zero tech, and then obviously having your 5 technique as well, because that just allows your linebackers to
Akeem Hicks and Khalil Mack.
Yeah, I was gonna more so be like Akeem Hicks and Eddie Goldman, who was the Bears' nose for the longest time, because that just makes all the difference in the world. And I think looking at the way that like this defense was implemented by Brandon Staley when he was in Los Angeles, it was kind of the same thing too, where you had pretty good linebackers who fed off a really solid front seven as well as a defensive line. But then again, when you have a guy like Aaron Donald, your players should be able to do anything. All right. Got one more Vikings related question for you here, but Aaron Rodgers no longer in the NFC North. I am sure we are all happy about that. Talk to me about what that means for you guys from a Vikings perspective.
It's different, right? Time is an undefeated opponent. It was always going to end someday, and now we're just on to whatever the next thing is. We don't really know what to expect from Jordan Love at all. The Packers don't seem to have the highest expectations from him. I have not followed every single quote. You'd have to talk to like Peter Bukowski, who does LockedOn Packers. But it sounds like they're sort of expecting him to struggle a little bit. That's what I get. So maybe this is now time for the division to open up a little bit, as the Packers have won it, 2 out of every 3 years since Brett Favre was here. Maybe now it's time for the thing to open up, and maybe it's time for the Lions, who are the division favorites, to go take over. Maybe the Vikings get to take over. Maybe the Bears can, once they're done with their rebuild, they can become the power of the North. I think the world is a little bit more open. If I'm going to be honest, though, Rodgers has been out of the division for a year and a half, functionally. The end of 2021, he started to struggle. You saw that kind of happen in that playoff game against the Niners. 2022, he struggled more. I don't think the Jets made a wise decision. I think the Packers actually got away with better compensation than, I think they made a profit here, which as a Vikings fan, I hate that. But that's nickels and dimes. What really defines what's going to happen in the NFC North is how these young quarterbacks turn out. These Justin Fieldses and these Jordan Loves, who we still, for one reason or another, get to call them unknowns, even though they've been in the league for a couple of years now. And the Vikings are probably going to have a young quarterback soon too. However that guy turns out, that's going to be what define. It's always quarterback, right? It's what's going to be. It is what will define this. Not did you get a second or a third in return, and was that profitable? All
right, so because you brought this up, I have to ask. Are Vikings fans genuinely looking at quarterbacks for next year already, knowing that you have guys like Caleb Williams and Drake May coming out?
Well, the Vikings are, so fans should be.
Yeah.
The Vikings are here's the thing. The you might remember some rumors that came out on draft day this last year about the Vikings possibly trading up. That was a bigger trade up than you may have realized. They were trying to get up to 3. They were trying to get Anthony Richardson. That's insane. That would have been a crazy trade, right? They would have moved up 20 spots. There would have been 3 first-round picks. Trey Lance, probably bigger than the Trey Lance trade. It would have been like really fun to cover, but crazy, right? So they're into quarterbacks, and they have not extended Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins has come onto the podium and said, we're not really going to talk again till March. So unless he takes him to the Super Bowl or something and makes it, so that the Vikings cannot justify getting rid of him, they're probably going to let him walk, and he's going to be a free agent next year. That's going to put the Vikings in the quarterback market. And then when they get to the draft, depends on where they pick and how easy it is to trade up and stuff. If they make the playoffs again, this might be a different conversation. But if they end up, winning 5 games and they're in the top 10, and maybe they can move up 3 spots and go get their Drake May or their Caleb Williams or whoever it is, it's kind of tough to determine who it's going to be because all these guys have a whole nother year of college to play. Take a lesson from Spencer Rattler, But whoever that guy is, then they can go target that guy. Whoever it is that they fall in love with, they can go target that guy, and then maybe sign some random bridge quarterback. Do kind of the thing like the Bears did when Andy Dalton was here, but really it's Justin Fields, and we just kind of need Andy Dalton until Fields is ready. Do the bridge thing, and that is what I anticipate to be the move. But Kwesi said it on the eve of training camp today. Did a press conference. He said, I never leave a door closed, never close a door. So Kirk could return next year if things happen to line up to make that make sense. But I do think that scenario is an unlikely one. I think there's a young quarterback in Minnesota sooner than later.
Let's switch gears to the Bears offseason. Tell us what you love. What did you absolutely hate when kind of looking at a team that finished in the basement of the division?
I don't want to do this to you, man. I don't want to come on your Bears show and be a downer about the Bears, but I feel like they're going too slow. I have a philosophy about like rebuilding and stuff that's pretty extreme. And most of this was discoursing about like the Browns a few years ago when they were doing the Sashi tank trust the process thing. Well, if you look at where that got them, that took them 5 years of rebuilding slowly but surely. They won 1 playoff game with Baker Mayfield, and now they're in an albatross. Just like the Vikings have been in some albatross, but they didn't go through any of that, right? They managed to compete in the meantime. So I think getting better is getting better, whether you suck first or whether you're just okay first. So I kind of disagree with the way the Bears have approached this entirely for the last couple of years. The Ryan Poles, let's just get rid of everybody and unabashedly suck. And, now you have a roster that takes so much more to build up to. Look, Tremaine Edmonds, I think that's great for you guys. Like, I think that's a player that if you play your cards right, can be a mainstay for the Bears for a long time, and you can be happy with that. Or somebody like DJ Moore, right? Like, you got good players, but your roster was so barren and so devoid of anything because of all of the teardown moves that Ryan Poles made. I mean, you still got guys that I don't think make half the teams in the league on your defensive line slated to start. Like, I genuinely think those guys are closer to the XFL than they are to any other starting roster. Slated to start. That's a problem. And that's going to make it so that the Bears, listening to the way the Bears have sort of sold this season, they're not really telling you we're a championship team now. Hey, we want to be competitive, but I think they're gearing up to say, if we win 7 games, we're happy with where we're at and we're slowly ascending. But by the time you're done ascending, you're going to have to pay Justin Fields or make a decision on him. So you better hope that this iteration of the offense is good enough supporting cast so that you can at least tell if Fields is broken forever. But I don't know. I have my reservations about Fields and his processing speed that makes me a little bit nervous on, is he actually the guy, or are you going to build this whole roster and then realize, oh, crap, we broke our quarterback because we surrounded him with a whole bunch of crap for his first 2 years and he didn't develop at all. I don't like the way the Bears, if were I a Bears fan, I would be pretty mad. As a Vikings fan, great. Yeah, let them toil in nowhere forever. But were I a Bears fan, I don't think I would be very satisfied. And I'm impatient. I'm sick of going into seasons and not expecting to compete. I want my team. I want to be able to go into every season thinking, hey, if things break right, my team can be a contender. And I don't think you can say that. I don't think the Bears have enough talent. They got more. It helped. The offseason, they had a lot of resources and they spent them. But if I'm a Bears fan, I'm going, all right, when do I actually get to care about this team? Because right now, you could skip 2023 and probably not miss much. I don't think that that's the team doing its fans much service.
Yeah, like you mentioned, so the Bears did get much better at a lot of positions this offseason. Mainly, you look at the offensive line, the wide receiver group, kind of retooling the running back room as well. But that D line is such a concern. We heard Ryan Poles say today, like, hey, listen, I'm not. He pretty much dodged the question because that's just kind of what happens here in Chicago. But he was like, yeah, I'd be foolish to not go ahead and explore every opportunity to improve our team. And at this point, it's like, who's out there on the open market that you can bring in that is going to have a significant impact, unless you're banking on a guy like a Justin Houston in his mid 30s coming in and significantly changing everything. Or, there's no like Nick Bosa or Khalil Mack that's magically going to become available, who you are generally going to push all your chips on the trade for. And that's simply because this is a regime that's kind of shown, yeah, look, we swung big on a trade for DJ Moore. We are not going to go ahead, even though we have the financial flexibility as well as the draft capital over the next few years to make a second big move in this offseason. But how about thoughts on Justin Fields outside of that slow processing ability? Because when he played against the Vikings in week 5 last year, like, he was 12 for 13 and was really, you could argue, in the second half, the best player on the field.
Yeah, there was that. There was that one really long touchdown that got called back. If I remember, there was like an illegal block or something. But yeah, look, for me, and I've been on a bunch of Bears fans. You guys love having other people from the elsewhere on the NFC North, which I love that about you guys. So I've done this spiel on a couple Bears shows already. But here's the deal: a highlight reel does not a career make. Justin Fields has an electrifying highlight reel. If you go look up his just bombs and all the times when he runs around and he makes all these plays that look like they're straight out of the SEC, that rocks. And that's really fun and it's easy to get excited about. But I look at Tom Brady, right? He didn't have any of that. He was great. What made him great was that every single play, he was efficient, he was on target, he was on time. It was, and there was a consistency to that was masterful, where you wouldn't see him screw up once every, I don't know, presidential term. Like, he would never screw it up. He would never be late. He would never be inaccurate. And so with Fields, and for me, a lot of draft stuff is I learn more from your lowlights than your highlights. And that's not me being negative. That's just me saying, like, I want to see what you do when you make a mistake and how you recover and all that stuff. And so with Fields, what I have seen of watching Vikings games, and I've watched plenty of Bears just out of curiosity too, because I liked him a lot coming out of the draft. I want to see how he's coming along. Is somebody that has not shaken that sort of innate want to break the pocket and start making something happen. And I think if Fields can work to preserve pockets versus break them and turn them all into scramble drills, I think that would be a really big step forward for him. But also some of the basics. This was far more common in his rookie year, so hopefully he's coming along a little bit more here. But I still see stuff where he's just like missetting protections. And, you've got a front that's showing a certain amount of people and you slide the protection away from where the front is. You can't be doing that at the pro level. And that's something where you go, wow, there was instant pressure on Justin Fields. What was he supposed to do? Well, he was supposed to adjust for that before he snapped the ball. And I think, understanding your blocking angles a little bit. When you have an offensive lineman on a defensive lineman and you've got that angle where he's covering his guy up, and then you move to the side where suddenly he's not covering his guy up and then that guy can break off and make the tackle on you. Well, you did that. That's your fault. And so I had somebody ask on my show, it was about Kirk Cousins, but the question is the same. Well, who do we blame for pressure? Is it really a quarterback thing? Is it really an offensive line thing? And the answer will always be both. So the amount of hits and pressure and stuff that Fields takes, some of that's on him. And if he can improve, you don't have to do anything on the offensive line. The pressure will go down. That's the optimistic way to frame it. And I think that that's also a reasonable way to frame it. But also, when you are slow at processing, and I don't think it's like slow at thinking. Like, I don't think he's dumb, but I think he doesn't trust it. And who's to, how can you blame him after the guys that Chicago has made him throw to? But that's kind of the Bears' mistake here, is that they made him throw to total dregs. And now he doesn't trust it. You see a dig route coming across the middle with enough separation, NFL separation, maybe not college separation, but NFL separation. And in the NFL, those windows are tighter. And when guys don't make it from college to the NFL, you've got the greatest, like, I'm not making this comparison, but bear with me, but Tim Tebow, greatest college player in the history of college football, doesn't make it in the NFL. Sometimes that can happen. And part of the reason is the windows get tighter. And you're great when there are bigger windows, but maybe you're not as good when the windows are tighter because you don't trust that that's open. And it hasn't been open for him. Maybe he shouldn't trust it, but he has to learn to. There's a lot of development that needs to happen left with Fields yet. And I look at the timeline as well. This team basically spent his entire rookie contract, QB on a rookie contract. One of the most important things that important advantages that a team can have. Jalen Hurts on the Eagles, or when they had Carson Wentz and they won the Super Bowl that year. Jared Goff on the Rams in 2018. That the Patrick Mahomes 2019. I mean, great QB on a rookie contract, and you spent yours tanking. That feels to me like a big miss. And I'm going to be honest, if I'm a Bears fan, I'm going, are we 100% sure this guy's our guy for 10 years? Or should I be going and looking up who's coming out in 2025?
All right, I got two more for you here, and that was awesome, by the way. But who outside of Fields on this roster is a player that you think is facing a boomer bust season going into 2023?
Like a make or break thing? Claypool, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when you get traded from the team that drafted you, and you have to kind of get to know a new place and a new group of teammates, a new scheme, a new staff, new mentors, new city. That's a difficult thing to adjust to. And especially for somebody like Claypool, who has all these famous bozo moments. Like I remember a Thursday night game a couple years ago when he was with the Steelers, where he was like celebrating too long, and he ended up chewing up so much clock that he caused the Steelers not to be able to win that game. Steelers fans hate him over this. So you've got some of that stuff that if I'm the Bears, I want to see nothing from that. But also, he ain't getting an extension, is he? Or are there talks on that? Do you know?
I mean, there's no talks of an extension yet. It's one of those situations where, you look at, so Claypool to me is incredibly polarizing because he's a guy who, again, had a really solid rookie year when there was good quarterback play. But since you look at the last two seasons, and again, 2021 was pretty much a broken down Big Ben Roethlisberger. And then last season was, first half was Kenny Pickett / Mr. Trubisky, which, again, jury's still out on Kenny Pickett, but not exactly the most confident thing when Mitch Trubisky's throwing you the ball. And then halfway through the season, it was another basically young quarterback, Justin Fields, throwing him the ball. So it's a situation where, if I was a GM at any of the 32 teams and I was faced with what to do with Chase Claypool, I would pretty much go ahead and say, even though I traded a second round pick for you, because at the time, there's no guarantee that I would be getting the number one overall pick or a guy like DJ Moore, I would go ahead and say, like, you got to go out there and you got to prove it, basically.
I think that's where he's at. And hey, look, if he shows up and he gets 800 yards in the first, 10 weeks, maybe we're talking about an extension. Maybe we just do it in the middle of the season, right? If he's just like totally explodes, but that doesn't feel like the guy who he is. And I think with the Bears, if you're Ryan Poles, you have to look at it and say, okay, Chase Claypool cannot be the excuse for Justin Fields, while Justin Fields is simultaneously the excuse for Chase Claypool. Either one of these guys is the problem and I buy into the other guy, or they're both the problem and I just have to go try this. I just have to go break it all down and try this again. Or if I'm the Bears, just think about what a succession plan for both of these guys can be. DJ Moore is your wide receiver one. Claypool, Mooney, these are filler pieces, I think. These are role players, and you need to kind of ask DJ Moore to be the king of kings. So I think that's... Yeah, Claypool's the guy that I would go to. I think Tevin Jenkins is another interesting name, too. He's had such an interesting career. If he's found his home at guard, then he can have a really good season and really sort of solidify himself there, be a stalwart forever. But if it turned out it was a flash in the pan, he might start to kind of fall down into the, are we trading this guy for picks now,
Yeah, I mean, Tevin's a huge risk because it's like he played left tackle, had back and neck injuries
Right.
as a rookie last offseason. I mean, he was a subject of trade rumors plus more injuries, moves to right guard. Now it's like three positions in 3 years with Tevin moving over to left guard. But last one for you here. I mean, everyone's probably asked this question on every single show on the history of the earth, but
Sure.
give me record predictions for 2023. Where do you have the Vikings finishing? Where do you have the Bears finishing?
Um, I kind of want to defer to Vegas on this stuff. I find record predictions to be just so played out, and I never learn anything when I hear someone else's. So I don't expect anyone to learn anything by hearing mine. So here's the deal: Vikings over under 8.5 right now at all the sports books. That feels fair. 8 or 9 wins. I don't know if 8 or 9 wins doesn't win the division though. It's a rough world in the NFC North right now, and I think other than beating up on each other, I think there's a lot of. I mean, you look at like the NFC West. I feel like any one of those teams, or the NFC East. I feel like you could make an argument for any one of those teams to come in and sweep a lot, right, and beat out these NFC North teams. I see 8 or 9 wins being fair for the Vikings. For the Bears, they're just not there yet. They're taking a slow, plotting approach. I disagree with it, but I understand why they're doing it. I think if the Bears get 7 wins, they're happy. I think that would be a positive outcome, but I would say 6 is probably 5 or 6 is a more likely outcome. They just are not a complete thought yet. And once they're a complete thought, then we get to see what Ryan Poles has truly been cooking, but it's a work in progress. And as much as I would hate it, Bears fans have kind of no choice but to be patient through what could be another pretty difficult year.
Yeah, the Bears over under I think is listed at like 7.5 wins according to what the sports
Sure.
books have put out there. So kind of ballpark as well
Yeah,
from
and
what you
sports books
mentioned.
won't ever go below 5.5, and they won't ever go above like 11.5. So it's 7.5 doesn't feel like, oh, they'll be an 8 and 9 team. It's kind of they'll be a below average team.
Yeah, it's one of those where it's just like, hey, let's just put 6 to 7.5 to kind of feel good and say, oh, we made a prediction. But where can people follow you on Twitter and keep up with your work?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find Locked On Vikings wherever you find your favorite shows. If you want to listen to a Vikings podcast, you can also find my Patreon, patreon.com/Luke Braun NFL. A little bit less Vikings oriented. That's a lot more about learning. I mean, it's usually breaking down Vikings tape, but it's more about learning the intricacies of position or learning about a certain play or something like that, as well as a history documentary, which I think Bears fans will enjoy some parts of it for sure. 7-part full series, 7 hours total, like a season of TV, on the history of the Vikings going all the way. The first episode, especially, a lot of interesting little nuggets about George Halas you guys might like.
That's awesome. We will definitely be sure to check that out as well. Thanks for hopping on the show. You are welcome on here anytime, and hopefully we talk at some point during the season too, Luke. But thanks again.
Sure thing. My pleasure.